Morning, everybody, and thanks very much for the opportunity to come and talk to you today. I've got 10 years of data to present to you in 15 minutes, so like Stuart, I'm going to rush through this very quickly, so tighten your seatbelts, and here we go. Right, what I'm going to be talking about today is monitoring the recovery of a previously exploited surf zone habitat in the St Lucia Marine Reserve. And a little bit of background here. We actually started this project in November 2001 along the lines of what people like Colin Atwood were doing in De Hoop down in the Cape. And the idea was to start a monitoring project and a tagging project to look at movements of fish. And one of the main aims of this project was to compare the catch composition, the catch per unit effort, and the size structure of shore angling species in the St Lucia Marine Reserve Sanctuary. This is an area that was closed to fishing in 1979, with that of the adjacent exploited area up to 11 Point, where in those days anglers could drive up the beach. Then we had in January 2002 new legislation drafted that prohibited driving on the beach, and so suddenly my exploited area between Cape Vidal and 11 Point became an unexploited area simply because anglers couldn't access it. So beyond a reasonable walking distance of 5 to 10 kilometers up the beach. So what that allowed us was an opportunity to monitor the potential recovery of this previously fished area. Just to show you where we are, we've had a lot of talks about St Lucia this morning. Basically, the project is run from Cape Vidal up here, and there's the sanctuary area there between 11 Point and Red Cliffs. That's 25 kilometers of coastline. The St Lucia Marine Reserve stretches from Cape Vidal there up to White Sands. And what we did was we set up 4 sampling areas. Exploited Area A, Exploited Area B, Sanctuary Area A, Sanctuary Area B. Each one of those areas is exactly 2 kilometers of coastline. And basically the project works that we have a team of 8 anglers, 4 anglers in one of 2 vehicles. The first vehicle will fish there on the first day, and the other vehicle will fish there on the first day. The next day, that vehicle will fish here, and this vehicle will fish there. And so we fish 4 days, and we fish all the areas equally. Same anglers, same bait, same. So just to go through the methodology very quickly, we use 2 vehicles, 4 anglers in each vehicle. Driving is conducted at spring low tide, 3 hours before or after low tide. So we drive on the wet sand. We go to those areas, those 4 areas I showed you the day before on the Monday, and we put up marker poles every 100 meters in our areas. So all our fishing is related to a GPS point. We know exactly where the fishing effort takes place and where the fish are caught. We're using standardized rock and surf fishing gear, only 1 rod at a time per angler, only maximum of 2 hooks on a trace, and we use a barbless hooks. All the hooks are crimped. Again, like Scotty was saying, to minimize mortality of fish. The fish, if they're small, we'll just land them straight onto the stretcher, but if they're bigger than a kilo, we'll actually land them, swim them into that stretcher. The stretcher itself has got a measuring board down the middle with a little headboard here. We put a wet cloth over the fish's face to calm it down and protect its eyes. It's measured very carefully, and it's tagged using a spaghetti tag if it's bigger than 30 centimeters. Each angler has his own tagging box, and he records all that information, the size of fish, the time it was caught, the size of the hook, etc., etc. We work very quickly, minimum of 2 minutes. That fish must be back into the water, and it's carried in the stretcher and released back into the water. So a lot of emphasis is placed on ensuring survival of the fish. The species that I want to talk about today, I'll start with my favorite, Speckled Snapper in the left-hand corner, large spot pompano, grey grunter, Natal stumpnose, cave bass or lanternfish, yellow belly rock cod, catface rock cod, and blacktail. Those 8 species make up the bulk of the catch composition. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about a lot today. So straight into the results now. The first thing I want to show you is I'm presenting you 10 years of data from 2002 all the way through to the end of 2011. What this graph is showing you is that this fishing effort, total number of angling hours, is almost exactly the same in the sanctuary area and those previously exploited areas, the red and the black bars. The reason for the change after 2006 is because here, the first 5 years, I was doing 6 trips a year. Every second month we were going up, and my wife was going to divorce me, so I had to drop it down to 4 trips per year. All right, so here the results right up front is that over the 10-year period, 50 field trips, we've caught over 12,000 fish. So we've caught an enormous number of fish. Of those, over 5,000 have been tagged. We've got a very high recapture rate, 700 fish recaptured. That's double what the National Tagging Project recapture rate is, which is a sign of good handling, etc. And high species diversity. We're almost in the tropics here, so lots of species, lots of different families. The important thing to notice on this graph is that I've pooled the previously exploited areas, E and EB, and the sanctuary areas. You'll notice more fish, more species in the sanctuary than outside, but we're comparing apples with apples. Grey grunter, speckled snapper, and large spot pompano are the dominant 3 species inside and outside. The biggest difference probably being the greater abundance of speckled snapper in the sanctuary area. All right, so now what I want to do is look at this question of, has there been any recovery? So the way I'm doing it is I'm taking each one of my sample areas, because they're all slightly different, as you'll see, in terms of the species composition. Speckled snapper, grey grunter, large spot pompano, blacktail, and catface rock cod are the top 5 species in terms of species composition. If you look at these graphs over the 10-year period, there's not a hell of a lot in it really in terms of catch composition. Perhaps an increase in the grey grunter, but otherwise pretty much of a muchness over time. If we move now to exploited area B, just for those of you who know, this is around vegetation, which is about 8 to 10 k's north of Cape Vidal. This is up now near Lone Tree. It's about 16 k's north of Vidal. And here you can definitely see the top 5 species, again speckles, grey grunter, large spot pompano. Now we've got cave bass coming in and blacktail. There's been an increase from these 5 species, about 60% there, up to about 80%, and that's because we've seen this increase in percentage composition of particularly speckled snapper, grey grunter, and perhaps a little bit of large spot pompano there. Right, going into the sanctuary area where you would expect this to be at a carrying capacity, at a normal thing, we've seen some chaotic stuff here, and I think this can really be explained by habitat. What you're seeing in 2005 is we had a sanding event. The reefs were covered with sand, and as a consequence we caught very few reef fish, grey grunter and speckled snapper, very few, but lots of large spot pompano and quite a few stumpies in that time. Similarly, in 2009 we had the opposite thing happening. We had scouring of reefs. We had a lot of small reef fish moving in onto that exposed reef. So you've got those changes. So that's largely as a result of habitat changes. Now we're into the sanctuary area B, which is about 10 k's north of Leven Point, right in the middle of the sanctuary. And here you can see an increase in speckled snapper, but I think this is largely as a result of learnt behavior. We've learnt over 10 years how to catch these fish better. We've also, in the last 3 to 4 years, been spending a little bit longer in the evening. So we would normally have stopped as it got dark and come back. But now we tend to fish the first hour or two into the dark because we know that that's the most productive time, and it's a time when we catch a lot of speckles and a lot of cave bass. So there's a little bit of a shift in sampling there. All right, so this is the really proof of the pudding, and this is what MPAs do. That's close to Cape Vidal. That's our exploited area A. This is pool data over 10 years, catch per unit effort. As you go into the middle of the sanctuary, the highest catch per unit effort in the middle of the sanctuary. And if you look at that, it's double what we're getting outside. So that's a clear example to me that no-take MPAs definitely work. There's no doubt. But let's look at this over time. What we would expect to see is, in these previous exploited areas, you'd expect to see recovery. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. In the first exploited area, we've got this trend of increase over time. And somebody was talking to me the other day about the length of these sampling projects. And I think, Leon, you made the point, or Digby, about working on things for a long time. If I'd stopped my project after 3 years, at the end of 2004, and I'd fitted a trend line, wow, I would have said there's a fantastic recovery. But the fact that we've gone on is showing this natural variability in recruitment of these species. So I think there has been some quick recovery once the fishing was stopped, but it's been fairly gradual. If we go to exploited area B, much closer to the sanctuary now, we've still got that quick recovery in the first 3 years, but a much stronger indication that things are improving over time. And bear in mind, we're close to the sanctuary now, so probably a bit of spillover coming across. So here we've had a doubling in catch per unit effort over those 10 years. If we go to the sanctuary, as we'd expect, the catch rate has stayed pretty flat. There's been no change because we'd expect that those spikes are, for example, large catches of large-foot pompano that I was talking about. And then, interestingly, in the middle of the sanctuary, again, we'd expect this to be flat. We have had a slight increase over time, but I think this is because of that learnt behavior of the fishermen knowing the areas a bit better and the times and how to target the main species. So if I took that now and looked at the individual species, there's speckled snapper. Over time, we've seen an increase both in the sanctuary and in the previously exploited areas, whereas what you'd expect to see is a flat line for the sanctuary and an increase in the previous exploited areas. I think there's a little bit of learnt behavior influencing our results there. Large-foot pompano, a little bit chaotic, probably a decrease in the sanctuary because we're not targeting those fish as much. We're fishing more on the reef for the reef-type species. But in the previously exploited areas, a slight increase. What's very clear here is the seasonality of these fish. They're very much warm water summer fish. So you can see in the summer months these peaks, and in the winter months these dips. Grey grunter, a much more picture that you'd expect. No significant increase in the sanctuary, but a nice strong increase in the previous exploited areas. So that's kind of showing what we'd expect to happen. And you've seen this graph a couple of times this morning. It's been really interesting to see what's happened in the Natal stump nose. Sorry. And you can see when we started the project in the early 2002, Natal stump nose were making sort of one of the top 4 species that we're catching. But over that time, the abundance has dropped quite significantly in the sanctuary areas and in the previously exploited areas. And that's that little peak that Digby was showing you that happened with that opening of St Lucia mouth, whether we had a little bit of recruitment coming in. And bear in mind, these are all big fish. These are all the big adults. And we're just not getting that recruitment of juveniles because it's an estuarine-dependent species. So let's look at size then. If we look at size structure of the fish, the speckled snapper, look at the numbers. Nearly 3 times more in the sanctuary than outside. And there is this trend of bigger fish inside the sanctuary. This is 10 years of pool data, but look at it over time, exactly what you'd expect. When we started fishing, much smaller fish in the previously exploited areas compared to in the sanctuary, and over time this nice increase in average size until the 2 graphs are tracking each other. So we've had that increase in size. Similar sort of pattern in large-spot pompano, bigger fish in the sanctuary area, and also possibly this catch-up over time so that they're now pretty much the same size in both exploited and previously exploited areas. Grey grunter, exactly the same picture, pretty much the same in both areas, and this nice catch-up over the first 2 to 3 years in terms of size. Natal stump nose, as we've seen, it's a little bit chaotic. Sample sizes are much smaller. There's a trend of bigger fish in the previous exploited areas, but bear in mind, look at the average size of these fish. These are 450 to 500 mils fork length. That's a 3 kg stump nose. These are big fish, and these are the big adults that are in the population. We're just not seeing these little recruits, the juvenile recruits that you'd expect. When we started in 2002, we were catching a lot more of these younger, smaller fish in the population. Stump nose lived for 16 years. The mouth's been closed for 10 years. We've got 6 left. And then just when you think you've got everything sussed, you get a complete turnaround. And here we've got Catface Rock Cod, which is showing us absolutely the opposite. We've got more Catface Rock Cod in the previously exploited areas and much bigger fish. And here I think it's a case of what we call a pioneer species. Catface move around more than the other rock cods. They grow a lot faster, and what they're doing is exploiting the niche habitat. We've fished out those resident yellow bellies and the speckles, and the catface have gone in and occupied that niche space. So it's a really interesting change. As Jade was showing you, we found in Ponderland, we've got those same changes happening in community structure. So in terms of conclusions, I think trends in catch composition revealed annual changes in fish abundance linked to recruitment variability each year, habitat changes, as I showed you with the sanding, that improves fishing skill over time, and of course the stock recovery that we've seen, particularly in the resident reef fish species such as the speckles, the yellow bellies, and the grey grunter. Overall catch per unit effort, as we saw from those graphs, the closer to the exploited area, the lower the catch per unit effort. You move into the middle of the sanctuary, the highest the catch per unit effort is. Trends over time suggest very quick recovery in those first 3 years, both the previously exploited areas, but the recovery in EB, which is closer to the sanctuary, has been much more significant and much more sustained, and is probably a result of spillover being closer to the sanctuary area. Oopsie, sorry. And individual species that, looking at them, again, showing the same sort of thing that we saw in catch compositions, a lot of variability, but there is sign of stock recovery even in some of those individual species. And I think the mean size of the target species was very clear that we saw that increase in the first 3 or 4 years. So recommendations coming out of this project, I think very important, using MPA no-take areas as a benchmark is highly desirable. It's a fantastic opportunity to be able to monitor what's going on in the natural variability and being able to compare that to what's going on in our human or anthropogenically affected systems. Monitoring programs like this must be very carefully designed and rigidly implemented, and we need to run them for a long time. If I'd just done this for 3 years, I would have got very different results to what I've got now. And as I showed you, just subtle changes in learning fishing behavior and fishing a little bit more in the dark changed my results quite substantially. So you've got to be very careful how you change these programs. That's the third point there. I think areas immediately adjacent to no-take MPAs should receive greater benefit from spillover, and we therefore can consider this as a sort of rezoning. You know, we can have no-take sanctuaries, and then on either side as buffer zones, what we call a B1 or a B2 zone, where there's limited harvesting, etc. And then a last point, which links into what Scotty was talking about, there's no doubt that this beach driving ban has allowed these resident reef fish species to recover in the surf zone. But I think if you go to this marine protected area, the situation now is that anglers at Cape Vidal and Sudwana are limited where they can get to. And as Cedric Kutsia put it the other day, it's like having a game reserve but not allowing your people to get into the game reserve to see it. And I just wonder whether there isn't opportunity for enabling somehow, not necessarily only shore anglers, but just picnickers, people who want to experience the beauty and the privilege of being in a marine protected area. And the idea here is possibly to have some sort of tractor-trailer system that would work, say, from Cape Vidal, go up on the low tide, and come back before high. So it's driving on the hard sand, very limited impact for driving, but people get the opportunity to see these magnificent coastlines and experience what an MPA is all about from the shore. So I'll leave you with that. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Bruce. Unfortunately, you haven't left any time for questions, but I'll allow one burning question if anybody's got a burning question. And Bruce, you need to come back for...
Thanks, Bruce. Great talk. You suggested possibly that there was an increase in catch per unit effort within the sanctuary over time that you put down to better fishing practices or learned fishing practices from those anglers. Yes. I'm wondering about the range of those fish species in terms of movement outside of the sanctuary and being bled by the fishing in the outside area during that time. So what I'm saying, let me get this right. So in the beginning of the time trend, those animals, if the ranges were large enough, could have been bled by people fishing outside of the sanctuary, or were those ranges too small?
Yeah, too small. They've got. That's the other side of the talk that I couldn't present today, is the tagging results and the ideas of where these fish are moving. And in the case of speckled snapper, they seem to have very small home ranges, and they so less chance of it being adult movement, but possibly there's the spillover of eggs and larvae that are coming in.
Thank you, Bruce.